Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
From a very sunny, which is a nice surprise and a nice change, Welsh Valley. We're actually in the, I think we're in the Elan Valley, possibly.
Yeah.
Maybe the Wye Valley, I'm not quite sure. I think it's Elan Valley, but we are at the famous Gigrin Farm. And if you don't know what Gigrin Farm is probably the original kite feeding station in the United Kingdom. It was set up in 1992 when the RSPB approached the farmers, sheep farmers of this area to put out regular feed for red kites. And as a result of that, we're, 20 years on, what you get is about 400 red kites coming every single day, which gives you an absolutely fantastic opportunity to get some real close in-flight shots of these remarkable birds. So come along for the journey and see what we see. We're just making our way down to the feeding site and to our hide. We're in the low level hide today. What's great about the low level hide is it only fits 2 people in, so it's just me and Pops, no one else. It is, as described, it's low level, so it should mean that we get some nice low shots of them swooping in to get the bits of meat off the ground. The sun's come out and it's beautiful, and most people will be looking at this thinking, oh, that's just, you couldn't get any better for a day's photography, but actually I'd prefer it if it was a bit more cloudy. There is a bit of cloud up there, and I'm hoping that it does just cloud up just a little bit, because the problem when it's really bright like this is that it has a tendency to be harsh light, harsh shadows, and also you've got some white spots on the red kite which are very easily blown. So I'm going to be definitely using my exposure compensation, possibly even down to -1, a full stop underexposed, just to protect those highlights of the kites as they're coming in. You can recover shadows to some extent. You obviously introduce ISO when you introduce noise when you're doing that, but you can't recover blown highlights, so I protect those at all cost. So one of the big problems you face when you're using super telephoto lenses, so Pops is on the 800 and I'm on the 500, is although it gets you so much closer to the subject, what you have to bear in mind is the atmospheric conditions between you and the subject and anything that's in between. So sometimes when you're shooting, and it was the case when we were photographing the dippers this morning, you're looking through your viewfinder and you can see the subject, and what you've not realised is that just in front of the end of your lens is a branch that's slightly sticking out, and it's only really then when you look at your pictures on the computer back at home you realise they look a bit soft and you can't work it out, and then you realise that you've been shooting through some foliage, and that can affect your image. What we've got here today is beautiful sunshine. And as I've said previously, that means, you know, that we can have really fast shutter speeds. You know, I'm using shutter speeds between 2,000 and 3,000th of a second, which is great because if it was dark and dismal, we'd be really high ISO to use shutter speeds at that distance. But the big problem that we're going to face today is because the sun's come out and it's been cool all morning, the sun's hitting the ground and the grass is a dark colour, so it's absorbing all that heat, and it's emitting a heat haze. So when you're photographing things onto the floor, and then when you start to look at them back on your camera, and indeed probably when we get back to the house tonight and looking at them on the laptop, they're slightly distorted. And we've had this in the past. We photographed a flock of curlew and we got really close. We used our field craft. We crawled across the field, got as close as we dared get, and we were absolutely over the moon with how close we got. They were filling the frame, these curlew, up on the moors. When we got back home and put them on the computer, looked like oil paintings, because it was middle of August, it was a red hot day, and the heat haze had completely destroyed the images. So that's going to be something we're going to have to just be a bit mindful of. Nothing we can do about it. There's no setting that you can put in place to overcome that. It might just be a case that we're photographing them a little bit higher off the ground and not so close to the ground, because that's where the heat haze will be affecting them the most. So I think one of the things that you can get from what we've told you so far is that, just like fishermen that complain about the weather all the time, photographers, they're always in search of the perfect light, but that doesn't necessarily mean the brightest conditions. There's a reason why professional photographers are out for the first hours of daylight and the last hours of daylight, that golden hour. Golden hour is the perfect time to photograph wildlife. It gives you the best lighting conditions, the best atmospheric conditions, and quite often it gives you behavioural aspects to subjects that you wouldn't get during the middle of the day when lots of people are around. It's just a shame that these feeding stations only operate at one time and one time only, and that's 3 o'clock today. So at 3 o'clock they'll be fed whether we're here or not. So we'll just have to make the most of it. Tractors here. Kites are well and truly up in the sky. We've definitely got over 100 up there right now. The tractor's just about to go into the field and all hell is about to break loose, so enjoy. You tired, Pops?
I am.
I can tell you've gone a bit doddery.
I am doddery.
You want me to carry any other stuff?
No, I'm alright.
You sure?
Yeah, yeah.
So that's the end of a 2-hour session. And Pops is feeling it, aren't you, Pops?
I certainly am. I certainly am. My arms are aching like mad.
It's unlike any other form of photography hide experience. It is a workout. I mean, you're talking probably over 200, 300 red kites coming down in waves. So even when the camera is on the tripod, it's still hard work. What we're trying to do really, as we were photographing them then, is to isolate a subject, track it, resist the temptation when others are diving, and follow it until it dives. That's really hard to do. You have to be very disciplined, because invariably the one that you're tracking is not diving and all the rest of them are, and the temptation is to shy away from the one that you're tracking and try and pick out one of the ones that are diving. That's very hard to do. Very hard to do. You're much better if you can track a single subject. We were in the low level hide there, and the low level hide is very enclosed. It gets you closer to the birds, but it means that tracking them is really quite difficult, and a lot of the time then they were coming in from behind us. So the first we were seeing as they were skimming across the grass, which made it really, really challenging. We're in the big tower hide tomorrow, so we're up high photographing down onto them, so it'll be a completely different type of experience. Pops, what did you think of today then? What was your thoughts on the low level hide and the general experience?
General experience, I thought absolutely brilliant, just like it was when we came a number of years ago.
Yeah, I think it was back in 2018 when we last came.
As long ago as that?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, well, yeah, because we got the pandemic in between.
Yeah.
But that low-level hide, I found a little bit frustrating because you just couldn't see where the birds came from, and by the time they hit the food on the ground, it was so quick you couldn't really capture that moment.
No, it was challenging, that one.
Very challenging. Yeah. I mean, I hope I've got some decent images. We've taken about 3,500 images, so I'm hoping one or two are all right. But yeah, from that low level, you're constantly holding your camera up and looking up, so the back of your neck aches.
Yeah, it does.
But it's still a wonderful experience. What a beautiful bird.
Yeah, and I found that when they put the feed out, in like 4 different locations. One of them was directly in front of us, and I think although that was the closest and the potential for some of the best shots, that was actually the most challenging to get the photographs of, because they were diving from behind us. I think if the wind had been coming from a different direction, they'd have probably been diving towards us, and we'd have stood a better chance. So, and that's where I tended to be using the 70 to 200. Some of them, the food that had been put out further away, lent itself to tracking the birds in and getting them diving, but I had to use the 500 for that, because the 70 to 200 we just didn't have the reach.
No.
But of course you didn't have that problem, because you were with the 100 to 400.
But it always seemed to be that the one I was tracking circled about a dozen times and then decided to fly off. Bit frustrating.
Yeah, and that definitely seemed to be the case. I have to say, as frustrating as that is the best method for photographing red kites at red kite feeding stations. It is impossible to try and photograph them as they're diving, try to pick out a shot as they're diving. The dive is ridiculously fast. Just prior to them diving, they tend to just kind of shrug their shoulders, and as they shrug the shoulders, they invert, collapse the wings and dive. And that's kind of the shot that you want, with the fork tail, the inversion, the wings folded back, and the dive. And I think it'd be impossible to capture that in any other way than to track the bird round. And just as Pop says there, invariably the bird that you're tracking circles time and time again and then flies away, and that is a frustration. But there are plenty and plenty of dives, and I think at first it's a little bit overwhelming. There's so many of them and they're diving so fast, but as time moves on and the numbers of them begin to thin out, the tracking them method seems to be a much better approach than just kind of, I don't like to spray and pray. It's easily done, isn't it, with a Z9? You've got 20 frames per second, and if you want to shoot JPEG, you've got 120 frames per second. But I'd rather select my subject, track it, and then burst as they're diving, as opposed to just...
It's far more rewarding.
It is far more rewarding.
Yeah, without a doubt.
So either this is the end of the video, and if it is, tune in for part 2, because part 2 we're in the big tower hide. If it's not the end of the video and this is just a pause until we get to day 2, stay with us, because tomorrow we're in the big tower hide, totally different experience. It's the tallest tower hide that they've got. We'll be looking down onto the birds, and it's open, so you'll be able to track the birds much easier than we have been today. Until tomorrow, ta-ra!